We're out here today working in the shop, working on this Buick. This is the 49 model. No motor, transmission like we showed in the update video a while back. We're working on pulling the steering out. We're going to be switching this over to rack and pinion. So we got to get all this old junk out. There's the cross member that the new one mounts to. All the parts are sitting on that table over there. So right now I'm working on a set of spacers to mount the rack to that cross member, and my dad's working on getting the old steering setup off the car because we were going to do an LS swap, but the steering box sitting up there gets in the way of any sort of exhaust on the driver's side. So we're gonna get this pulled out of here pretty quick. Got the old setup off the car. I'm not really sure. I mean, that's a tie rod, and I guess that's a tie rod because there's no center link on this car. We're gonna leave the box on it for now just because the car's up in the air. And we're gonna try to figure out where to mount this cross member. We might have to put some plates on it or something because this kit is for a 48 to 51 Chevrolet, which I guess is a little bit different. But it'll go in there, something like that. We'll have to make it fit to mount it and then bolt the rack to that. Got the rack mounted to the cross member that it came with just to see what it's going to look like. And because of the difference in the frames on a Buick to a Chevrolet, I guess the Chevrolets are pretty much flat across here. So we're going to build a set of pads a little bit bigger than the ones on there, so we can come off here and build a flat spot to mount it to so that it'll look better and just work a little bit better that way. So we got the plasma cutter fired up over here and we'll see if it works. Last time it didn't work very well. Okay, we had a little bit of a change of plans because of the way this frame is different, I guess. The rack was going to end up sitting really low, about 2 or 3 inches off the ground, which is just not enough. So we ended up cutting the tabs off, and we are just going to weld to these tabs. We might actually cut these off a little smaller because there's not really a reason for them to be that big. But we cut about 1.5 inches off, or 1.25 inches, to raise it up. So maybe it won't be the first thing to smash into the ground. And now we're gonna work on, once we get it right where we want it, we'll box this in. Of course, we'll cut that off a little bit, and then we'll box this in so it's super strong, and hopefully it's square and in the right spot.
Okay, got this one here, kind of just throw up there. Haven't cleaned it up too much yet, but we just went around the edges there, around here, so we'll clean that up and then get back to it. Okay, back out here today working on this Buick a little bit more, trying to get it set up where we can mock the engine in it to kind of see where it's going to set. Got the rack mounted. You see the extra holes in that cross member there? We actually had to drill those because our with the cross member being centered in the car, the rack was not centered in the car. So we moved it to try to get the same steering angle on both ends. But I mean, it's all pretty easy stuff on this part of it. Got the rack mounts, got the tie rods set in, nothing's for real. And then the steering linkage, it's just sitting here because I'm gonna set the motor down in here and kind of see where that's gonna go, what we'll need as far as angles and stuff. And then once I get the motor in here, we'll figure out where the mounts go. Probably gonna try to move the master cylinder on this car. The brakes don't work on it anyway. And we may try to relocate it up on the firewall with a power booster and a bigger master cylinder so we can put disc brakes on the front of it, but we'll see how that works out. So that's kind of how the mount went. I mean, other than moving it, we moved it an inch from the original mount hole. We moved it 2 inches and that was too much, so we came back and moved it an inch. Does not steer real short like it did with the factory steering on it, so I'm not sure how that's going to work. We're going to mess with that. Anyway, but yeah, there's that part. I'm going to set the motor down in there, which is sitting right here, and get an idea how it's going to look and where it's going to fit and all that stuff. So we'll update you later on. Okay, got the motor kind of setting down in it. It's going to go back more, which it's already back a long ways, but object is to get everything back, get the weight on the middle of the car instead of on the front. But this has got the one-piece rear end drive shaft in it, so it's in the way of letting it go back any further, which it'll go back about another 6 or 7 inches, which will get rid of this big gap right here on the back of the car. So I'm gonna work on getting the rear end busted loose in this thing and see how hard it's gonna be to get it out. But that's gonna be kind of the idea. And this one I'm gonna put all the factory stuff back on it. I'm gonna run a factory computer, factory intake. I'd like to run the factory exhaust manifolds if I can make them work around that brake booster down there, or that master cylinder down there. If not, we're gonna relocate it up here where that little patch is right there. They make a kit that'll actually bolt right into that and gets the master cylinder, and then you can put a brake booster and stuff on it, which would be nice. So I'm going to work on pulling this motor back out and getting the rear end loosened up in it. When Austin gets home, we'll see if we can jerk it out of here real quick. Okay, got this thing raised back up. So here is the rear end assembly out of the car. Solid tube, bolts directly to that Dynaflow transmission or the 3-speed, whichever they had in them. So our plan is we're going to use a 12-bolt rear end, and we're going to take these truck arms off, bolt them back on the other rear end, and then we'll build us a mount right here in the front where that goes together, so that we still get the articulation and the movement, and that way we don't have to spend a bunch of time trying to relocate everything. We can just use these, and we'll do away with these cool shocks that are on it. These are the old school shocks right here, and they work really well when they work. My 51's got those on it, and they're about wore out, so I may swap these on there because they seem to be good. So that's the rear end. And that's the hole that it left. The coil springs are still tied in up at the top. Had to cut the panhard bar bolt out because I'm not sure how it works, but it didn't come out, so we'll have to replace that panhard bar. We want to put new bushings in it anyway. So yeah, there it is. Big 1 7/8" exhaust pipe that they had on the back of this thing. And then there's where the drive shaft has got to come through when we're done with it. So, should be pretty cool. Okay, we've got the truck arms cut off out of the rear end. Those were tacked on the top. And then here's the truck arms. I haven't cleaned them up yet. So what we're going to do is we've got this 12 bolt here out of a square body Chevrolet 5-on-5 bolt pattern. 1.5 inch difference in width, which won't hurt us any, so we're going to use it. So I'm going to come in here and cut these spring perches off, cut the shock mounts off of it on both sides, get it cleaned up, and then we will get the truck arms and the mounts for the springs and stuff put on this rear end, and we will leave everything loose on it till we get it in the car, get the pinion angle and stuff set, get the spring mounts where they need to be, and then we will come in on top and weld it just like it is now, or like it was on the other rear end. It should make a pretty stout rear end.
Okay, we're filming a little update here. I'm not sure where he left off with his videos. So we got a different rear end. This is a 12 bolt out of a pickup. I think it's got a 308 gear. It don't really matter. So we've got the trailing arms for the Buick bolted on. They're real loose because this rear end is smaller than the other one, axle tube wise. So we're going to shim it up till it's tight, and then we'll put it under the car and try to test fit it and see if it's going to work, and we'll tack the trailing arms to the axle housing so we can have a located rear end. We got the rear end under the car, took the drums off just because we had them out. Sitting on a table, we're going to try to lower it down until the springs hit the rear end, because the springs will bolt to these, and we'll try to just get it squared up in here where we can see if it's going to work or if it's going to be too wide or whatever, and we'll see what it looks like. We got the rear end under the car, got the trailing arms bolted to it. We ended up having to shim the rear end. We used a piece of exhaust pipe that we split, that we're going to weld to the tube, and then we'll weld this to this. So we got that, so they're fairly tight on there. We're going to go through and tack everything right now. We're not going to go all out because we don't have the transmission mounted yet, and we want to make sure we don't get our pinion angle and drive shaft angle wrong. So we're going to get all this tacked in, and then we're going to bolt the springs, because the springs on this car bolt top and bottom. So we're going to get the springs and the pan hardbar bolted in so this thing will hold itself up in the car, and if we need to roll it around we could do that, and then we'll go on to mounting the motor and transmission so we can get all of our angles to work together. Okay, we're jumping all around on this project. The rear end is kind of mounted. We got the motor sitting in there where it's going to go. We've got that side welded in or tacked in. We're cutting out new pieces to mount this side. We've got these universal bushings on here. Because of clearance with the steering rack, we had to move it slightly to the passenger side so the factory mounts aren't long enough. So we got the plasma cutter set up over here again, and we got a piece marked out that we're cutting off. So we'll get those cut out, and hopefully by the end of the night we'll have the motor mounted, and the transmission mount's gonna be super easy, so we're not too worried about it. But sorry for the jumping all over the project, but we don't like to work on one thing for too long, so we just bounce around.
Okay, out here working on the Buick again today. We've got the motors actually setting in it. Here's the mounts. They're not finished, they're just tacked in. And then here's this one. And then this morning I came out and was working on a cross member for the transmission. Let me back this thing off a little bit. There we go. So it's not this car is not going to be fancy at all. It's just simple stuff. But that just bolts into the frame. Some braces on the end of it. Just locate it. Now we're getting ready to pull the motor back out of it, and we'll get everything cleaned up and painted and have that part done. Then we'll start working on the rear end, getting mat brackets built for the truck arms that we're using on it.
Okay, we got the transmission cross member in. I'm sure he should have videoed that, so you probably already saw it. But we're working on the rear end now, trying to get these trailing arms mounted. So what we're gonna do is cut a piece of 3/8 plate that's gonna go in here, and then it's gonna be flat on top so we can mount a rod end to it, one that was used on the original Chevette build, because we just happen to have it laying around. So we got the metal on the table over here. We're not gonna use the plasma cutter because it doesn't like the 3/8 plate. So basically we're cutting out a big horseshoe, and then we're going to relief cut it here and here so we can fold these up at a 90-degree angle, and then we'll weld the gap back in after we cut it, and then we'll probably relief cut it here and here so we can fold these out at an angle to match the trailing arms, and then we'll weld those back up so it'll be super solid. Okay, we got the mount that I was talking about made up, 3/8 plate, folded, welded inside and out, and then we kicked out the feet a little bit so they'll fit up in these trailing arms, because this originally had a mount similar to this, but this was wrapped around the drive shaft because this had a sealed drive shaft that was bolted to the back of the Dynaflow. So we're getting ready to drill this hole in the 3/8, and this is long enough where we can run another bolt through back here so we don't get any twisting. Once we get this side tight and welded in or bolted in, then we're going to do the same thing on this side. Drill a hole here, bolt it, and then drill a hole like up 2 inches back and bolt that, and then we'll worry about mounting our rod ends on the front so we can locate the rear axle. Okay, we got our piece bolted in that we made to bolt the truck arms or trailing arms, whatever you call them, in. We got the tubes in here just clamped in. They're going to get welded around the front and the back, and then up both sides that we can get to. We got these tube ends that we're laying around. They got a nice rubber bushing in there so we won't have any rattling. We're going to cut out 3 tabs that are going to go, one here, one in the middle, one there, and then the one in the middle will have a spacer on it on both sides so that we have a nice tight fit, and we're just going to run 1 bolt through it all the way through, and that should be plenty solid for the type of car this is going to be, because it's not going to be a hot rod. And then once we get that done, the rear end should be able to hold the car up so we can actually roll this thing around. Okay, here's what we came up with. Everything's just tacked in right now. We got 3 mounts with a spacer because we wouldn't have been able to get 2 bolts in there with nuts on the back side. I got the pipes welded in on the front right now just to hold them in. We're going to let the car down and see how it sits, and hopefully none of these welds break. And we'll be able to see the car sitting under its own weight, at least in the rear. The front will still be really tall. Okay, the back of the car is sitting on its own weight. It looks like we got the rear end pretty much square in the car. We have a little bit of adjustability to push it forward and back because of those threaded ends. So that's going to do it for this video, because this video is going to be pretty long, I think. The only thing that's not hooked up in the rear end is a panhard bar, which we'll probably have to modify to make sure that that's centered. Next video we'll be working on probably brakes, and we'll also be finishing up the rear suspension. So thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Let us know how you think we're doing.